Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. For today's video I'd like to share with you my design for some water jug earrings. Now they're just kind of cute. Maybe you've got a friend who's an Aquarius, maybe you just like that whole Greco-Roman aesthetic, maybe you're an archaeologist and you want to just play around with some design ideas. I'm going to show you how to make these as earrings, but you can obviously take that design and do exactly what you like with it. Let's have a closer look on the board and then crack on with today's tutorial. So here's my cute little water jug. We're going to be working with 1mm 18 gauge wire and 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire. I'm going to add in a pair of ready-made earring findings and some 2.5mm faceted rondelles of your choice. The piece I have in my hand has got quite aquatic tones. The one that I had in my ear has got slightly pinky hues, just very gently, a little bit like a sunset colour. I think they're really cute. With these very simplistic earring designs, the water jug sits very close over the lobe of the ear. You could obviously have that seated on a slightly longer drop or just use them for other items in your arsenal of makes. Let's pop these down out of the way and talk about our materials. So the primary material, and you'll obviously need to do two of them if you're going to use them as earrings. I've done mine as odd sizes and odd shapes just to show that you can have a little bit of control over the exact shape. You could take that upper section a little bit closer together, make it really narrow up at the top, and in that way you'd make it into an Amphora style, which is a particular type of water jug. So I'm beginning with 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and I have 1 6-inch length here. You'll need two of those if you're going to make this design as earrings. So the first thing that I want to do is to get that really nice and smooth and warm, and ensure that that is good and straight to begin with. Now if you are making these as earrings, what I would recommend is every time we create a step on the design, you do that on the second piece as well, in that way that you can control and get them to match up. Now I would happily wear these as earrings in different sizes and colours, but you may prefer to go for total symmetry if you are going to do this design. So let's get that little bit of wire nice and warm, and we're going to start just to one side of that centre point and push the wire back over itself to make kind of a sharp V shape. Now this is the bit where we decide how wide we want the lowest part of the water jug to be. So I'm going to keep that quite close together. This is probably going to be in the region of 6mm or so, around about 1/4 of an inch between those two bends, and they're going to just cross over to begin with. Now I quite like the aesthetic of having just a little bit of a dimple in the base of the water jug or the amphora if you're going for that design, but you can equally have that bit straight as well. So before we start tightening up the two sides of the foot of the water jug, I'm going to bring that wire back out in the same direction. So I'm over here on the right hand side at the moment, and I'm going to push the right hand wire back out towards the right. I'm going to flip the design over because it's easier for me to control with my right hand than my left hand, and I'm going to repeat that manoeuvre, trying to keep these sizes and sides as equal and opposite to one another as possible. So that's reasonably close to this point in time. I just want to push that wire back down a little bit. What I'd like to do is to get a straight line going on here. So you can see that on the right at the moment that's a lot wider. So I'm just going to try and tighten that up slightly, make it a little bit narrower. One of the ways I can do that is just to pinch that wire slightly and draw that back up and out. Now I like to have the foot of the water jug quite narrow. As I said before, you could go for a straight base or you could go for a slightly dimpled base. What we're going to do is just tighten up those two sides really quite firmly now. So that's over tightened, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. I'm going to tighten the other side, and then we will bring those two pieces into alignment with one another. What we are looking for is to have those two pieces of wire where the little U-shaped bends are in the middle. We just want those touching but not crossing over. So I'm just going to play around with that design until they sit side by side. Once I'm happy that they're sitting side by side, I can decide whether I want a flat base or a dimpled base. I'm going to give that a really good squash because I like how it looks when it's all nice and tightened up. Give that another squash on the other side, and then ensure that everything is in 2 dimensions only. Everything is nice and flat. So now I want to add a little bit more heat and warmth into the wire. either side of that section. Now you can use a ring mandrel for this next part, but you could equally use a larger marker pen. I'm just going to grab my wooden ring mandrel, make slightly less noise on the desk when I drop it, which I inevitably will. So I'm just going to ensure that that's really nice and toasty warm in the centre there, before I pop my round form in and start to create the lovely rotund water-bearing section of my water jug, or my amphora if you prefer to go for that design. So if we were making this as a traditional amphora, which is a two-handled water vessel, we would want to taper this quite tight up at the top and just bring the wire ever so slightly out. I'm going to go for this quite traditional, quite relaxed water jug feel, but you have the option to kind of personalise that shape if you want to. The key here is to get the same bow shape on one side as you get on the other. So we're looking to keep the centre of the mandrel in the centre of our little jug design, our little water design. So I do want to make sure that that's nice and strong. If I'm happy with that base section, I can either give that a little bit of light hammering, or I can just open and close my pliers on there just to give it a little bit of extra strength and rigidity at this stage. Now what we're going to do next is decide whereabouts we want the top of our water jug to be. We do need to ensure that we have enough wire up at the top to create those elaborate side handles. So I'm just going to get that nice and warm up at the top again. Just pull that slightly closer into the centre as I'm warming and straightening those wires before I decide how deep I want that water jug to appear. So I'm going to grab hold of my pliers. I've decided that this is whereabouts I want that bend to take place, and both of those wires are going to go out opposite and equal to one another. You can draw a line on a piece of paper if you prefer, and in that way you'll probably get much better symmetry than I'm getting right now. So I'm going to just bring that round ever so slightly more, and you can do your little bit of research using your preferred search engine and find out what kind of design you want to replicate. I'm just going, as I say, for these quite fun, quite cute little water-bearing vessels. So the next thing that I want to do is to draw this top section of wire down really sharply and firmly. So I'm going to support the water jug itself rather than the wire that's coming away, because I want to just bring that down as close as I can for the moment. I'm then going to pinch the assembly and then just very, very carefully draw just the top bit quite closely together, leaving the wire coming away just here. So I need to repeat that on the other side. So again, to begin with, I will support the water jug wall, bring the wire down a little bit, make sure that there is a gap at this stage, pinch the assembly so that when I apply the pressure in this direction, everything stays nice and flat. Now you'll see it's slightly kinked out of shape at the moment. Don't worry about it, we will address that in a second. What I'm looking to do is to pinch the same distance in that little hairpin racetrack shaped section up at the top, and we can straighten that out as we go. Now for the next part, to create this lovely elaborate shape for the handles, you can use a pencil or a pen or any small round form, or if you have them, you can grab hold of your bail making pliers. It doesn't matter if you have 2-step or 6-step. What we want to do is to super warm the wire that's just coming away from the side of the jug. Without distorting the shape that we have at the top here, we're going to just gently pull that away. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. Again, if you are making these as earrings and you want them to be identical, then just do 1 step at a time, and you'll find it much, much easier to ensure that you do get that level of symmetry that you desire. So I'm just going to make sure that everything stays nice and flat. Going to give those a good squish, and then I'll decide which number on my bail makers or which pencil I'm going to use to create that lovely flared shape for those handles to come away from that water jug. So if I pop step number 3 in and just draw that wire back across the centre of the vase, I'm going to look and see if that's large enough. I don't think that's quite large enough. I don't think it fits with the values of the rest of the vase. So I'm just going to warm that through and open it back out very, very gently. I haven't disrupted the rest of the shape of the jug, so all is well. And we're going to try step number 4 instead to see if that looks better. So drawing the wire back across, I think that's a much nicer size. So I will flip the design over. Using the same step on those bail makers, I'll just draw the wire across that central jug section. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how that's coming together so far. So what we need to do now is to turn the wires away again. Now, ideally, what you need to do is ensure that the distance between the end of the wire and where it crosses over the jug section is the same on both sides. By eye, that looks pretty similar. This side might be just a millimetre or two longer. So you could draw, as I say, on a sheet of paper, and in which case you can absolutely control the precise sizes, and I think I'll take a millimetre off this side or half a millimetre off this side, straight to the scrap pot with that residue. You could use a central line if you wanted to, just to ensure that those sit exactly where you want them to. Now I need to grab my round nose pliers, or you can use your specialist memory wire pliers for this next task. They're really quite handy to get. I tend to use them more for round nose plier jobs than I do for memory wire, but there we go. So we're going to start with the handle on this side, just because it's on top at the moment and it's easier for me to get to, and I'm going to grip with the very tip of my round nose pliers at the very end of that wire on the handle. I'm going to support the shape we've just made. I don't want to lose that shape because I'm matching that to both sides, and I'm going to rotate that around until it just nestles past the edge of that water jug. And I now need to do the exact same on the other side, so the very tip of those pliers, rotating that around whilst preserving the shape that we've created for the handle until it just passes to the outside of that water jug shape. That needs just a tiny tweak to match the other side. So at this stage you could hammer this design, and if you do go for a hammering, let's just get the mini block and a very tiny hammer. You need to make sure that everything is in 2 dimensions only. None of these wires are to be crossing over. We want them to sit completely flat as if they've been created between 2 panes of glass. So let's just give that a gentle hammer. Now what you'll notice is that I'm supporting where the wires touch each other as well as the top of the frame. What this does is it prevents the wires from wandering around whilst your piece is on the block. What can happen if you don't support the wire is that it will spread out and out and out, and you will lose the shape that you were desirous of receiving. Don't even know if that's a word, but there we go. So I'm going to push this down really firmly into the block now. You can take a lot more time than I am today to get that absolutely perfect, but that's the nuts and bolts of the shape of your water jug. So I would make up my second piece if I was making these as earrings in exactly the same way, and I would generally do that step by step. So I'd set the distance across the base there, and then I'd set the angles, and every time I did it on one piece I would do it on the second piece of wire, and in that way you're much more likely to end up with identical matched parts. Once you've hammered them both, we can move on to the adding of the beads inside the water jug, or amphora if you've gone for that design aesthetic. For the next part of today's tutorial, I'm going to add in some very small beads. I'm using 2.5mm faceted rondelles. These are quite chubby rondelles. You could equally use round beads. It's entirely up to you. It doesn't really make a lot of odds. The wire I'm going to use now is 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire, and I have around about 12 inches. It's more than I need. What I'm going to do is just very gently open up the handles on both sides, but only by a very small amount, and as I say, very gently. I'm going to sit the wire over the top a little way inside the handle of our water jug. Now I've got around about 2/3 of an inch over the top there, and what I'm looking to do is to get a good 3 wraps around just this section of the first side of the jug, and I'm looking to represent the water by having beads inside the jug going all the way around the edges from around about 2/3 of the way up. I don't want my jug to overflow. So we're going to go for 3 wraps, and ideally what I'd like to do is end up with the tail of the wire being cut just inside that frame, that teeny tiny residue going away straight into the scrap pot so that nobody stands on it later. I'm going to tighten up that coil neatly and firmly and just ensure that that sits very nicely where I want it to. So I want it to sit quite close to the top, but I'm leaving a small gap just here because it means that I can then add on a top layer of beads later on. Now you can do this all in one go with a single piece of wire, but what it means is that you end up with an irregular number of wraps at the top of your jug, and I'm aiming for symmetry here. So if I flip this over onto its side, we've got 3 wraps of that finer gauge wire just beneath where the arm or the handle of the jug comes away, and there's a little gap between that wrap and the top of the jug. So I'm going to find the tail of that wire and I'm going to add in my first bead, and this is one of those designs where it's just a repeating technique. So I've got a bit of a kink on the end of the wire, but I think I can probably still get that bead on. There we go. So I'm going to allow that bead to zip line down into position, and it's going to sit flush against the inside of the frame of that water jug that we've created. So my finer gauge wire starts on top of the frame, goes through the bead. I'm then going to pinch the bead against the frame wire, draw it all the way down inside the jug, like so. Pull that up around the outside of the jug frame, but not the outside of the handle. And I'm going to wrap 3 times between each bead. So the wire passes down the centre, and I'm going to draw it up here because it's less stress on the wire. Down the centre of the jug, all the way around the frame created by the jug, and over the top again. Now I've got 3 visible wraps, and at the moment that is still mobile. So if you've created that too tight up to the top, you can just scooch that down ever so slightly. One of the reasons I added that top line of beads into my design is it means that you can add your earring finding directly into the waterline, and then your jug earrings, your water jug or amphora earrings, will sit very, very straight. If you want that to hang slightly to one side, you can go slightly to one side of the centre of that top line of wire, or you can add in your earring finding inside the jug handle. However, there is a small element of danger that you'll end up with your jugs hanging like so, and it doesn't necessarily look quite exactly how you'd expect it to. So I'm going to add in 1 more bead before we move on to the next step. And all you will do is repeat all the way around until you have filled the inside and you meet up to a symmetrical point on the other side of the jug. So we're going to support that bead inside the frame wire so it sits just flush like so. Support the bead, draw the tail of wire down inside the jug, around the outside of just that jug frame here. We're going to do that once, twice and 3 times. Now it can get quite quick. When you get into the rhythm, it's really quite easy to get them to move quickly and build up. When you get down to the base, you're going to want to wrap 3 times to the left of the stem of your water jug, and then you can sit a bead just down in the centre. Now there is a little bit of fluidity to the design, so if you find that when you've brought those beads down it doesn't quite sit right for you to do 3 wraps and then drop a bead in, wrapping from the other side after you've added the bead, if that doesn't line up, you have that flexibility to move the waterline down just a little bit to make sure that everything works for you. So I'm going to continue adding these beads all the way around the inside, and I'll be back with you in a second just to show you how to add on that top line of water bead. So I've continued all the way around the inside of that water jug, adding those beads and just getting them to sit neatly. I'll show you now how to add that top waterline. So I've added all of those final beads, and this is the last point really that I can mess around with the shape of my design. So if I wanted to make it slightly narrower up at the top, I could very, very gently just draw these 2 double wired sections slightly closer together, like so and like so, and just draw that a little bit closer. It's starting to look a bit like a gin balloon with handles, which as far as I'm concerned is not a bad thing. What we want to do is to make sure that those beads sit equal and opposite to each other. So I'm just going to scooch those very, very gently down, making sure that I have indeed left gaps up at the top. Now you are able to very, very gently just prise that apart just a tiny amount. There's something else that I wanted to show you at this stage. This weave, where you're adding beads inside a frame, looks different on the front side as it does on the back side. On the rear you can see all of those extra stripes of wire supporting the bead in position. Now it's entirely up to you which way you prefer. They're both equally as beautiful, just in slightly different ways. I have now a scrap. It's around about 3 inches. It's probably more than I need, and this time it's a slightly heavier wire. It's 0.5mm or 24 gauge. Now I'm going to rest that over the top again of the design. I've decided that this is the front. This is the way I want to see my water jug design, and I'm going to just rest that over the top again, very, very gently opening up that handle just a teeny tiny amount, and I'm going to wrap 3 times up towards the very, very top of the design. Now you may find that at this stage you need to have your pliers help you get into those slightly tighter areas. Let's just move that over a second. So I'm going to generate a little bit of tension with those pliers, wrap the tail inside that water handle, and bring that over one more time. Now you can either poke the wire through the hole, or you can do what I was doing, which is draw it just down that inside that gap. And I'm going to tighten that coil up neatly to make sure that it does have a really good strong hold. We're going to now grab hold of those flush cutters, just draw that wire back inside the frame and trim away, so that it really does sit the end right inside that frame. It becomes less visible if you sit it inside the frame, and also less likely to catch on hair, clothes, scarves, etc. So I'm going to give that a little straighten, and you'll see that even though there's only a very tiny difference in the 0.4mm which we use to add the beads and the 0.5mm which we're using to add the beads at the top, it is quite visible, and it will handle quite differently also. So we're going to now load on our beads. If you're wanting to hang your water jugs in the same way that I did, which is centrally on a simplified ear wire, you'll need an even number of beads to allow that to happen. If you're going to hang yours at a jaunty angle, it doesn't really matter whether it's an even or odd number. You can just decide whereabouts you want to apply that ear wire later on. Really, the only proviso at this stage is that your beads do still go on that 0.5mm or 24 gauge wire. I don't think there's going to be a problem because these are lovely little beads. That's a third bead. If I was going for that more amphora look, I could bring that slightly tighter and straighten those little prongs at the top, but I think I'm going to go for 4 beads again. One of the reasons I'm using a slightly stronger wire at this juncture is because it's going to hold the weight of the rest of the design. Now it is a very lightweight design anyway. We're only using small amounts of wire, and they're not terribly heavy wires at that. So I'm going to very carefully pinch that line of beads into position at the top, draw that tail all the way around, and I'm going to use my nails to scooch down to get a really good tight wrap. I need a second wrap, and I just need to give that a wiggle to make sure that it sits in a form where it's wrapping around the frame and it's not crossing over itself. So again, at this stage you might prefer to poke the end down inside that handle aperture, or you might like to wrap. This is the point at which it can cross over, but you can give that a bit of a wiggle and just get that to sit super neatly until it comes back up on the other side. You see that we've got that wrap is going around in the same direction all the way along. And make sure that you trim the correct piece of wire at this stage. It's very sad if you trim the wrong bit, because it means you've got to start that process again. Let's get that end tucked away so that the very end sits inside the frame. Flip that over to the front, and there you have your water jug design. You can take a second just to close those handles back up. You could even have the handles coming over the front slightly if you prefer. If you're concerned that those are going to catch, if you have flyaway hair, you can also, when you're adding the beads onto that section of the water jug, you can also use a couple of those passes of wire just to capture the handle of the design as well. Makes it slightly fiddlier when you're doing the later sections, but it does add an element of security. It's fiddly to show on camera, but that is an option. You can also just refine any last minute angles before you say, done. Well, I hope you've enjoyed making the water jug earrings with me. Could also be wine if you prefer. Let's look at it from that direction as well. Can't really see it from this angle, but you'll see it on the desk anyway. I think they're really, really cute as earrings. Could be wine, could be gin, could be for an Aquarius, could be an Amphora, could be for the archaeologist in your life. Hope you enjoy it. Have yourself a lovely day. See you soon. Bye for now.